My name is Jack, and I live in a small town in Oregon. The kind of town where everyone knows each other, goes to church on Sundays, and gathers for barbecues in the evenings. A slow-paced, measured life. What else do you need for happiness? I have a wife, Sarah. We've been married for 7 years. A typical love story. High school sweethearts, first love, wedding right after college. Sarah is wonderful, kind, caring, always supportive of me. She works as a teacher at the local school. The kids adore her. I also have a mother-in-law, Martha. Now there's someone who definitely doesn't fit the provincial standards. In her 50s, she looks 40 at most, wears jeans, rides a motorcycle, and always speaks her mind. A bit of a hippie at heart, a rebel. But she and I have always gotten along. Martha says I'm the only one who can handle her stubborn character. Life was going on as usual, until one day the mayor of our town came up with an initiative. He said we have this old abandoned park with unique plants, why not restore it? Make it a landmark, an attraction for tourists too. The people enthusiastically supported the idea. Of course, anything is better than a vacant lot full of garbage. Martha, naturally, was completely fired up by the idea. She's a fan of everything like that. History, antiquity, ecology. She's always dragging me to architecture lectures or forest cleanup events. And here it was, 2 in 1, restoring the park and learning about the town's history. Jack, this is an amazing opportunity, Martha lectured me over a family dinner. We'll be able to touch history, do something meaningful for the town. You simply have to participate. Sarah just laughed, seeing her mother's enthusiasm. She knew that once Martha got something into her head, excuses were useless. So all I could do was sigh and agree. After all, what's the harm in spending time with my mother-in-law in the fresh air? It's not like battling a dragon, really. Oh, if only I had known what I was getting into then. That this damn park restoration would turn my life upside down, along with my principles and everything I believed in. But I guess you can't escape fate. No matter how much you hide, it always finds a loophole into your soul. Anyway, I agreed to work on this project together with Martha. Sarah supported us in every way, even promised to come help in her free time. Well, as much as her school schedule would allow. Martha and I started gathering materials, studying the park's history, developing a reconstruction plan. In short, we got fully involved. At first, everything was going quite peacefully. Martha and I would spend hours in the town archives, sorting through old documents and photographs. We discussed which plants would be best to choose, how to arrange the paths and gazebos. Martha was positively glowing with enthusiasm, and I too, I must admit, enjoyed working on something so constructive, I guess. Sometimes we would sit over the papers late into the evening. Sarah was usually already asleep by the time I got home. She would slip out early in the morning while I was still fast asleep. Somehow it just turned out that I started spending most of my time with my mother-in-law. Well, what's the big deal? We just got carried away with a shared cause. Except over time, this passion became kind of weird. No, the work was progressing, the park was gradually coming to life. But the atmosphere between Martha and I was subtly changing, becoming somehow more personal or something. The first alarming sign was our conversations. We would increasingly get sidetracked from the topic of restoration and start talking about life, about childhood, dreams, how we imagined our future. Martha shared that in her youth she dreamed of becoming a famous photographer and traveling the world. Exhibitions, presentations, bohemian parties, that's what she fantasized about. Oh, Jack, you can't even imagine what a wild child I was, Martha recalled with a laugh. I constantly hung out with the artsy crowd, ran off to rock concerts. Oh, how many of those I attended in my time. My parents were going crazy over my antics. Looking at Martha like that, flushed with sparkling eyes, I suddenly caught myself thinking that she was a damn attractive woman. And it wasn't just about looks. There was this special spark in her, an inner fire that neither age nor mundane worries could extinguish. Next to her, I felt alive, I guess, as if a long-extinguished fire was starting to ignite in my soul, too. Martha also started looking at me in a new way. A scorching gaze over a cup of coffee, a mischievous smirk in response to my awkward joke. And sometimes I would catch her giving me a long, pensive look that made me uneasy. But I would immediately banish the silly thoughts. Come on, what nonsense, really. She's my mother-in-law, my wife's mother. We just have a good, warm relationship, that's all. Meanwhile, work on the park was progressing in full swing. We planted flower beds, trimmed bushes, laid tiles. Thanks to the city authorities, they provided us with a few workers to help. So things were getting done, albeit taking a lot of time and effort. One time we stayed in the park until dark. We got carried away planting some rare bush that Martha dragged in from the nursery. I was digging holes. She was carefully placing the seedlings. At one point, our hands accidentally touched. A fleeting light touch, but it was like I was struck by lightning. Martha also flinched and pulled her hand away. She looked at me kind of strangely, almost frightenedly. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to," she stammered, averting her eyes. "No worries, it happens," I managed, feeling my face flush. An awkward silence hung in the air. Martha started fiddling with the already perfectly placed bush for some reason. I suddenly noticed that her hands were trembling. From the cold? Or, no, that's ridiculous. "I think I'll head home," I muttered, hastily brushing off my jeans. "It's late. Sarah must be waiting." Of course," Martha nodded quickly. She also started gathering the tools, carefully avoiding meeting my gaze. "We'll continue tomorrow." On the way home, I couldn't get what happened out of my head, that strange burning sensation from an innocent touch. Martha also seemed embarrassed? Agitated? Damn, what am I even thinking about? Enough already with the self-delusion, imagining things that aren't there. At home, Sarah greeted me, smiling, homey in a cozy robe. She kissed me, asked how things were going at the park. I brushed it off with the usual fine little by little and hurried to take a shower, to wash off the sticky haze of wrong thoughts. The water jets whipped across my back as I stood with my palms pressed against the tile, telling myself, "Get it out of your head, forget it. It's just ordinary friendly affection, nothing more. You have a wife whom you love. Don't you dare think about anyone else." But as soon as I closed my eyes, Martha's face would appear before my mind's eye, her mischievous smile, the squint of her green eyes. I was angry with myself for these fantasies, and at the same time, somewhere deep down, I already understood that I was in trouble. I had stumbled into some kind of shaky, dangerous quagmire, and I didn't know how to get out of it. For the next couple of weeks, Martha and I were walking on eggshells around each other. We tried to keep things pointedly detached, only talking about business. But the tension hadn't gone anywhere. It hung in the air, sparked with every accidental touch. I was spending more and more time at the park, leaving early in the morning, coming back late in the evening. Sarah was surprised at first, then started to worry. She said I had completely neglected the family, gotten carried away with work. A couple of times she even cried, saying maybe I had fallen out of love with her, maybe I had found someone else. Those words made my insides churn. No, of course not. I love my wife. We're doing great. This project just takes a lot of effort and time, that's all. Yes, damn it. I just want to do something useful for our town. Isn't that why I'm spending so much time at the park with Martha? As for the vague, unbidden fantasies about my mother-in-law, well, it happens to everyone. Some kind of delusion, a midlife crisis. The main thing is to keep myself in check, not to give in. After all, I'm a grown, sensible man. I should be able to take responsibility for my actions. Or not. Because that day when the irreparable happened, I still don't know how it occurred. As if I had a blackout, a temporary lapse of sanity. We were finishing setting up the central gazebo. I was fiddling with the railings. Martha was sweeping sawdust off the steps. The heat was unbearable. My shirt was sticking to my back. At some point I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled it off over my head. Well, what's the big deal? There was no one around anyway. The workers had long since left. Even the birds had hidden from the stuffiness. I turned to Martha, wanted to ask where I left the screwdriver, and met her stunned gaze. She stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, drilling her eyes into my bare torso. There was some new, unfamiliar expression dancing in her pupils. Not surprise, not embarrassment, hunger, lust. My mouth instantly went dry. My heart started pounding like crazy. I stared as if enchanted, watching Martha slowly set down the broom, step towards me. There was something predatory, languid in her movements, completely unlike my always restrained mother-in-law. "Hot, isn't it?" she breathed, getting very close. "I'm terribly thirsty." And she ran her fingertips across my chest, lightly scratching my skin with her nails. I swallowed hard, feeling a hot spasm wrench my lower abdomen at her touch. "Martha, don't!" I rasped almost inaudibly. "We shouldn't—" She exhaled hotly right into my lips. A wild, indomitable flame danced in her green eyes. "We've long crossed all the shouldn'ts, Jack. You feel it too." And I lost control, roughly pulled her to me, delved into her soft lips with a demanding, greedy kiss. Martha gasped, wrapped her arms around my neck, pressed herself against me with her whole body, as if she had been waiting for just that, permission for madness. Everything rushed by in a haze after that. Feverish kisses, tangled hands, the rustle of falling clothes. I think I tore Martha's shirt. I think we knocked over a bucket of paint and it spread in a bright puddle. Who cares? The whole world could have collapsed right now. I wouldn't have cared. I scooped Martha up in my arms, sat her on the concrete flower bed, latched my lips onto her delightfully long neck, grazed the thin skin with my teeth. Martha moaned, throwing her head back, digging her fingers into my hair. "Yes, Jack, just like that. I've wanted this for so long," she whispered hoarsely, scorching my earlobe with her hot breath. "Let's do it, here and now." The last shreds of sanity shattered to pieces with a crash. My hand slid down her back, pulling her closer, feeling the heat of her body through the fabric of her clothes. Her moans grew louder, mingling with my ragged breathing. I felt her legs wrap around my waist, her body arching, demanding more. Our movements were fast and desperate. I felt her warmth, her response to my every touch. Martha pulled me towards her, her nails leaving marks on my back, her breathing heavy and intermittent. Our passion was animalistic, uncontrollable. We moved in unison, every second filled with tension and pleasure. We lost ourselves in this whirlwind of sensations, forgetting about everything but each other. It was wild, crazy, beyond all limits. Forbidden fruit, the sweetest, the most desirable. The climax hit us simultaneously, twisted us, turned us inside out, splashed like fiery lava. We cried out in unison and collapsed exhausted onto the flower bed, gasping for air, clinging to each other like drowning people to a straw. Martha came to her senses first, pulled away, looked at me with huge, shocked eyes. They were swirling with such a mixture of feelings: horror, shame, fading glimmers of passion, and guilt. Immense, all-consuming guilt. "God, Jack, what have we done?" she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "How could we? Dear Lord, no!" I myself started shaking. The realization of what happened was sinking in with a delay. I had just slept with my mother-in-law, with my wife's mother, right in the park like a lustful dog. God, how horrible! I hastily tucked myself in, tried to hug the distraught Martha. She broke free, frantically pulling up her pants. "No, don't touch me! I can't! You hear me? I can't! We shouldn't have! This is some kind of madness!" "Martha, please, calm down," I almost begged. "Let's talk, discuss." "No, there's nothing to discuss here," she nearly shouted. "It's dirty, disgusting. We should be ashamed. Forget it, you hear me? Forget this ever happened." She abruptly spun around and almost ran out of the gazebo, and I stood there, crumpling the ill-fated shirt in my hands, feeling a sticky, suffocating feeling corroding my soul, a mixture of guilt, shame, and forbidden, shameful pleasure. I was sickened by myself, and at the same time, as soon as I closed my eyes, my body would be pierced by sweet languor, a phantom sensation of Martha's closeness. It all happened so fast, so spontaneously. We succumbed to a primal animal instinct, and now we had to deal with the consequences. What next? Could it be that, having indulged in madness once, we wouldn't be able to stop? Would we continue to sink into this pit, betraying the trust of our loved ones? I didn't know the answers. I only knew that I was in over my head. And that incident by the gazebo was just the beginning of an inevitable collapse. For the next few days, Martha and I carefully avoided each other. We would go our separate ways right after work, not even exchanging a couple of words. We were even afraid to look at each other, as if one glance would be enough to awaken the slumbering insanity. I barely slept, tossing and turning with insomnia. As soon as I closed my eyes, vivid, searing images would flash before my mind's eye. Here we are with Martha, our bodies intertwined, choking on moans. Here she is, arching towards me, biting my earlobe. After such fantasies, I would jolt awake in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat. furtively look around, checking if I had woken Sarah. But my wife slept, serene and unsuspecting, and I wanted to howl from the tearing feeling of guilt. I couldn't find peace. At work, everything was falling out of my hands. My thoughts were jumbled. At home, I paced from corner to corner, unable to focus on anything. Sarah worriedly peered into my face, asked what was wrong. I brushed it off, blaming fatigue and nerves. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. Once at dinner, she couldn't take it anymore. Put down her fork, looked at me intently. "Jack, we need to talk. I can see something's not right with you. You haven't been yourself lately." Everything inside me dropped. Could she have guessed? Sensed the stench of infidelity? The sticky stink of betrayal? "What are you talking about, honey?" I squeezed out, carefully avoiding her eyes. "Everything's fine, really. It's just—" "Just what?" Sarah interrupted me. "You started staying out late for no reason? You come home all on edge, snap at the slightest things, not to mention—" She blushed slightly. "The lack of intimacy. That's never happened before." God, that too. I really couldn't bring myself to touch my wife after what happened, as if the brand of infidelity was burned on my forehead, indelible, unremovable. "Sarah, listen," I began, frantically searching for words. "It's not about you, really. I think I've overworked myself with this project. That's what's getting to me sometimes." My wife squinted, biting her lip. I could see from her face that she didn't believe a single word. "And this has nothing to do with Mom, right? You two have been out of sorts lately. You don't even really talk to each other." Damn it, I forgot how perceptive Sarah is, how well she knows both me and her mother. The thought made me queasy. I had betrayed her, betrayed both of them, Sarah and Martha. God, what a scumbag I am. Something like that must have shown on my face, because Sarah suddenly changed her expression, turned pale, clenched her fists so hard her knuckles turned white. "Jack," she said quietly, almost in a whisper, "don't tell me. You couldn't have, with my mother?" And she fell silent, looking at me with eyes full of horror. And I sat there as if my tongue was tied. All the prepared phrases, evasions, excuses, everything flew out of my head. There was only a viscous, suffocating feeling of shame left. The silence dragged on. Sarah stared at me point blank, as if hoping that I would now laugh. Say that this is all just a stupid joke, that nothing happened, that she imagined it. But I was silent, and that silence spoke louder than any words. "Get out," Sarah finally forced out. Her voice trembled with tears and barely restrained rage. "Get out of my house right now. I don't want to see a trace of you here." I opened my mouth, wanted to say something, at least try to explain myself, ask for forgiveness, but I realized it was useless. From the frozen, instantly aged look on Sarah's face, I could see that the point of no return had been passed. I myself had doomed our marriage to ruin, with my own hands. Silently rising from the table, I trudged to the bedroom, packed some clothes, documents, and my laptop into a bag. Sarah didn't say a word while I was packing. She just drilled into my back with a heavy, pain-filled gaze. At the doorway, I turned around, wanted to say at least something as a parting word. Apologize, make excuses, promise to fix everything. But Sarah wasn't even looking in my direction. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at one spot, tears running down her cheeks, and I left. Quietly closed the door behind me, as if afraid to disturb that frozen, petrified grief. Got in the car, started the engine, and only when I had driven a couple of blocks did I allow myself to break down. Buried my forehead in the steering wheel and burst into tears, howled, choking on snot and tears, biting my lips. God, what have I done? How could I have done this to the people I love the most? For the next couple of days, I lived as if in a fog. Checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts. Thankfully, I had money for the time being. Sat in the room all day, staring at one spot. Only one thought kept spinning in my head. What now? What to do with the burden of guilt and shame tearing at my soul? Sarah didn't call or write. Apparently, she was pondering what to do with our marriage now. I didn't dare bother her, even though I was beside myself with worry. What would she decide? To forgive, to give a second chance, or to file for divorce? At some point, I couldn't stand it. I called Martha. It took me a long time to work up the nerve to dial the number. I just stared at the phone. And when I finally did, I heard the answering machine. Apparently, my mother-in-law wasn't ready to talk yet either. After a couple of days of torment, I decided, enough. You can't run from problems all your life. You have to face them, no matter how scary and shameful they may be. I had to sort it all out. With Sarah, with Martha, with myself. Otherwise, this internal corrosive feeling would simply devour me. To begin with, I decided to talk to Martha. After all, this is how it all started, because of our weakness, succumbing to a shameful attraction. How could we have let this happen, betraying our closest ones, destroying the family? I came to Martha's house unannounced. I was a coward until the very last moment, circling near the house. But then I resolutely parked and rang the doorbell. My mother-in-law didn't open right away, but when she saw me, a whole storm of emotions distorted her face. Surprise, confusion, guilt. "Jack?" she asked quietly, leaning against the door jamb. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed hard, felt sweat beading on my forehead. "Pull yourself together, you wimp. You're here to sort things out and clarify everything once and for all." "We need to talk, Martha. May I come in?" She hesitated for a second, but then silently stepped aside, letting me into the house. I went to the living room, sat on the edge of the couch. Martha settled across from me in an armchair, hugging herself. It was clear that she also felt awkward and anxious. For a minute we sat in tense silence, not knowing how to start this difficult conversation. Finally, I gathered my courage, sighed heavily. "Martha, listen. What happened between us was a terrible mistake, a momentary lapse of reason. We shouldn't have given in. It's wrong." I expected my mother-in-law to start objecting, arguing, but she only lowered her head, hiding her eyes. "I know, Jack. Believe me, I'm beside myself with shame and remorse. How could we have done this to Sarah? Betrayed her trust, our family." Her voice faltered, her shoulders shaking slightly. I realized Martha was crying, silently, bitterly. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I wanted to go over, hug her, comfort her, but I remained seated. That would be inappropriate now. "It's all my fault," I said dully, crumpling a pillow in my hands. "I didn't protect our relationship. I allowed myself to get carried away, to lose my head. God, what's going to happen now?" Martha took a shuddering breath, wiping away her tears, raised her reddened eyes to me. "I don't know, Jack. I really don't know. Sarah is furious. She doesn't want to see or hear me, and I understand her. How can you forgive something like this?" I suddenly felt scared, to the point of shivering, to the point of cold sweat. Could this be the end? The collapse of our family, of what we had worked so hard to build over the years? And for what? A fleeting flash of passion, an animal attraction? "Martha, we have to fix everything," I began feverishly, leaning forward. "Talk to Sarah, beg for forgiveness, explain that it was just some kind of eclipse, that we'll never repeat this mistake again." She shook her head, smiling sadly. "If only it were that simple, Jack. But what happened between us? It didn't arise out of nowhere. We were drawn to each other, looking for an excuse to be together. We flirted, teased, played with fire, and naturally got burned." I bit my lip. There was a bitter truth in Martha's words. What happened in the park was only the finale of a long, excruciating dance on the edge. The game we played, not wanting to acknowledge our true feelings. "So what do we do now?" I asked helplessly. "Forget about everything, pretend nothing happened, or confess to Sarah, take our deserved punishment?" Martha sighed heavily. I could see from her face that she was also tormented by this dilemma. Lie or tell the truth? Keep the shameful secret, or purify ourselves with confession, even if it costs us our family? "I don't know, Jack. I really don't know. We need to think, weigh everything. Maybe we should give Sarah time to cool off and then try to talk, decide how to move forward." I buried my head in my hands. A dull, aching pain was pounding in my temples. I wanted to scream, beat the walls with my fists, but I restrained myself, only laughed bitterly, mirthlessly. "You know, Martha, when I came here, I thought we could solve everything, that it would be enough to just apologize, repent, and life would return to its usual course. But now I understand, nothing will ever be the same. We've destroyed everything with our own hands." I raised a pained, hunted look at her. Martha looked back, wearily, hopelessly, realizing there was no way back. There was only uncertainty and guilt, shared between the two of us. We sat in silence for a long time, each lost in our own thoughts, immersed in gloomy musings. And outside the window, evening was falling, twilight thickening, as if nature itself was echoing our mood. Dreary, bleak. Finally, I stood up, heavily leaning on the armrest of the couch, cast one last bitter glance at Martha. "I'd better go. We won't solve anything here for sure. We need to think it all over, cool down, and then decide how to move on with our lives." She nodded without looking at me. From the tense line of her shoulders, I could see that Martha was also having a hard time, that she was also consumed by shame and guilt. But now an insurmountable gulf lay between us, and attempts to bridge it would only make things worse. At the doorway, I turned around. A whole whirlwind of emotions was churning inside me. Resentment, disappointment, anger at myself. But I pushed them away. Now is not the time for emotions. We all need a cool head and prudence. "I'll call in a few days," I tossed over my shoulder, opening the door. "We'll need to meet and discuss everything. The three of us, like adults." "As you say," Martha replied quietly. "I hope Sarah will at least agree to listen." I snorted mirthlessly. Right now it seemed almost impossible for my wife to sit down with us at the negotiating table. She doesn't even want to see me, let alone Martha. But it's worth a try. After all, our future depends on it. As I slowly trudged to the car, I pondered the vicissitudes of fate. Just a couple of months ago, we were a normal, loving family. And then at some point, everything went haywire. Forbidden attraction, secret meetings, lies. And here it is, the logical outcome. How to deal with this mess now? Beg for forgiveness, repent, promise that it will never happen again, but it's not just about physical cheating. It's about betrayal, about undermining the very foundations of trust. How do you get everything back on track after that? I dropped my head onto the steering wheel with a groan. No, there will be no solution, at least not an easy and quick one. We all have a long and painful road ahead of us, a road of repentance, forgiveness, finding ourselves and each other anew. And I'm not even sure that at the end of this road a happy ending awaits us. Too much has happened, the wounds are too deep. But one thing I knew for sure, no matter how hard it gets, we have to walk this path, to the end, without turning back. Otherwise, what we had between us, love, family, trust, will die for good, and I couldn't let that happen. Not now, when the future of the people dearest to me is at stake. Resolutely shaking my head, I started the engine. I'll try to contact Sarah today. Set up a meeting on neutral ground, try to talk. It probably won't be a pleasant conversation, but it's necessary. Like a patient needs a bitter medicinal decoction. And then we'll see. Life will show whether we can overcome the consequences of my betrayal, heal the wounds, learn to trust each other again, or we'll have to part ways. Painfully, heavily, but at least honestly. But whatever happens, I'll accept it. Because I know retribution is inevitable. You have to pay for everything in this life. The only question is whether you're ready for that price, and whether you can handle it. I really hope so. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.